Right. And we just have old cliches that prevent us from creating value. Like if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. Really? Because
so much.
There's a lot of stuff that I'm not that good at.
Yeah.
If I can find other people that are weird enough to like the things that I don't, awesome. We can get further, right? It might not be as fast because there's training and there's delegation and there's pieces like that. But really getting good at marketing, really getting good at finding other venues and avenues to create processes and automation to deliver what you're up to, and then collaborating with the right people to get further. This is all a big part of value creation, but it begins with understanding who you are. Money can be complicated. Let a nerd help you. We're here to demystify the complex nature of money by getting you answers from financial nerds and whiz kids. Welcome to Ask the Money Nerds, a weekly segment of the Wealth Labs podcast where we answer your most pressing money questions. Is there a secret to money, to finance, to prosperity? I mean, is it as complicated as people make it? First off, I've got Chief of Staff Stobel here with me today as we explore this topic, and I hope she can hold it together. I said a small joke, and she really enjoyed it, so we'll see how that goes.
It got me really good. It was a great
really
way
good.
to start the day.
It's a good way to start the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing
All right,
wrong with
what's
a
the
little bit of
question we got here
laughter.
today?
Okay, so Ben wrote in, and Ben has a question about investor DNA. He says, how do I figure out how to create value? He says, I think a lot of people hear you say value creation and rack their brain on how they can figure out how to do it. And so are there steps to pinpoint what they can do to create value? And do you recommend a way to figure these things out? Okay,
so I see two things here. Investor DNA, number one, and value creation, number two. So in the world of cause and effect, value creation is the cause and dollars are the effect. This kind of demystifies money because a lot of people feel like you have to be born into it. You have to be lucky enough to win the lottery. You have to be in the right place at the right time. And sure, there are those people that have those situations, right? Like there's certain companies, if they were started 10 years before, wouldn't have made it, or 10 years later, they'd be too late. And so some of it has to do with when you were born. But there's certain fundamentals and principles to prosperity, and let's unveil that. So beginning with investor DNA. So investor DNA says that risk is in the investor, not the investment. When I say that, what does that mean to you?
Well, it's all about who you are and how you show up.
Right. And so if you're investing in things you don't know about, I call that gambling. That's speculation. And a lot of people get into this notion of, oh, everybody's making money doing this, I'm going to go do that, but it might not be the right thing for them. So if we break down investor DNA, it's your core values first. Now, core values, because we tend to pay attention to that which matters to us. And if it doesn't matter that much, yeah, it might make us money, but if it's not more than that, it might not be that sustainable. The second thing is our core competencies. What? You're almost going to laugh here. I don't even know. Core competencies got you. But that's your abilities.
It's the residual impact of the joke.
That's how funny of a comedian I am. I say one joke and it's just minutes of laughter.
Okay.
So core competencies is really that part of the value creation. It's like, where do you have a skill set? Where do you have unique, insights, or where can you come up with strategy more easily? And then finally, we really look at the core drivers, those things that really motivate you and move you forward and create interest. So when we look at values, competencies, and drivers, we combine that with focus. So diversification for a lot of people becomes diversification. They spread themselves thin. They get involved in more than they can handle. They don't understand what's going on, and they call that investing. And the investment world kind of has them buy into that. Like, hey, if you don't know if this is going to work or that, so spread yourself thin. Well, that's good as a preservation strategy. It's kind of horrendous as a growth strategy.
Yeah.
So investor DNA believes in focus. Now to focus, you really got to build a foundation. Do you have enough safety and liquidity? Do you have your insurances intact to transfer risk? Do you have the basic pieces handled for your foundation? And if you don't, and you skip those, well, maybe you have to diversify because you're building it on faulty ground. There's not the foundation there.
Yeah.
So,
and having the foundation does give you the space to think more creatively and start problem solving and looking at other opportunities and ways of doing things, right?
Well, I look at it like if I have those things handled, they don't occupy the real estate in my mind.
Yeah, that's
where
a good
I'm
way to
worried
say
about
it.
them, right? Because if I don't have those handled, I might have more scarcity in my life. People that have no insurance, like if they're with no medical insurance, they might be like, oh, I hope nothing happens, or no life insurance, and then someone dies. They go, oh, I hope I'm gonna be okay. And so that starts to become some of their like shrinking level of thinking. And so even if I never make a claim on insurance, it provides a benefit in that I'm not worried about it because I know I've transferred that risk.
Yeah, definitely. So when you talk about core drivers and finding your values, how did you identify those in your life? Because I think back to my life, and there were some books that I read, but it was also ultimately listening to my life speak. Like, where do I have enthusiasm? What topics do I love talking about? How do I love connecting to people? And just listening to myself in a lot of ways. Like, what is it that interests me? What are the things that capture my imagination and that I pay most attention to? What do I find myself reading about on the internet most regularly? But do you have some other ways that people can...
What triggers you? Like, I get triggered if someone questions my integrity.
Yeah.
Like, ooh, because it's a core value, right? Freedom. If I feel any lack of freedom, I get super triggered. You know the story of me being stuck in Guatemala because of my kids' passports.
Yeah.
Like, super stressed in that because freedom is really important to me, right? So go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's a good way to identify.
But the way I started was I just had this list, right? There's this big list of like values and I circled them. I'm like, oh, which ones apply? And then over time I refined that. So you just start somewhere, right? And in Win Then Play, when that book comes out, I have kind of that values list and part of discovering investor DNA. And so, you know, that's a resource that will be coming out. And then when it comes to competencies, I just look at like, where do I really feel like I'm great? And at first it was hard to identify because it feels like, oh, I don't want to brag. And, you know, so I went to people that I knew and trusted and I said, hey, what do you think I'm good at? Like, what would you count on me for? And I started to recognize those characteristics showed up, whether it was in a personal situation or a business situation. Like when I lived in this house, my first home that my wife and I bought, not the apartment we lived in when I was a miser, but this home that we bought, we hosted monthly parties, theme parties, right? Like from a pajama party to a rock star party to you name it. And I just was good at organizing and getting people to show up. That was just something that I hosted events in my business. I hosted events in my personal life. And I'm like, oh, there's a certain natural tendency that I have to connect things, right? Like whether it was a softball team that I started back in the day and we were awesome and we took first place and they moved us up the next league and we sucked. Because dudes would be like standing with a beer in the outfield and they could just catch anything. And we were like, we went from best to worst. But, you know, like I just was good at being the catalyst for that. So that helped me gain some insight. So when you look at your competencies, like I know I'm good when it comes to money and finance. I'm decent when it comes to health. But if we get me into technology, okay, that's a little bit different. If we get me into other sectors that I'm not paying attention to, just different. So I know what to avoid and what to embrace. So that really helps. And so I think we can just go through those own exercises in our life. And then the second part of this question is value creation, right? How do you create more value? In my 20s, I used to just create more value. That was like my statement for everything. Yeah. I think it was like I was a smug a-hole that people wanted to punch in the throat all the time because, yeah, that's a cute statement, but how do you create more value?
Yeah.
That can be complicated because when we go to college, they don't really teach us how to monetize our skill sets. They teach us a skill set that may or may not be valuable.
Right.
So how do you monetize that skill set? So part of creating value is learning how to market. Like we have to learn how to market so people could even be aware of what we do, whether that's marketing ourselves and our skill sets or that's marketing what we're up to so other people can engage with us.
Yeah.
And I remember I had this CEO for a while back in like 2007, 2008, and I kept harping on marketing and he was like, whatever. And then he got really good at it. And then he was like the poster child for ClickFunnels, you know, like he got independent of me, got so good at it. And it just made a huge difference for him to expose his skill sets to the marketplace.
So would you advocate that someone create their personal brand, like build a website, get themselves out there?
I mean, I didn't build a personal brand until recently because I was more like, I wanted to have a company that was in the forefront and I could be in the background. So I had a lot of freedom, right? Going back to my freedom value. Yep. And then I got to a point where I'm like, I want to have more reach, like impact and growth and progress is like a value for me. So, you know, when that was in conflict, it was confusing. And then I said, wait, it's not an either or, it's an and. So to create more value, we got to learn how to market. Number two is we've got to learn different ways to engage with people. So for me, I had to get good at writing. I wasn't good at writing if I really wanted to make a bigger difference. And I had to get good at doing webinars or podcasts or video, which meant that I hired coaches to be able to be more, you know, directly valuable in those areas, like the one-man show that we're creating right now.
Yeah, that's really exciting.
Yeah, having a director and a screenwriter and a comedic writer and, you know, designer, like there's people. And so it really comes down to we've got to get good at collaboration to create more value because we have to find other people that are good at value in ways that we're not so that we actually can provide the full amount to the marketplace.
Yeah, life is less about competition and more about collaboration and how we can create synergy by coming together with our own unique abilities and skill sets and thoughts and to create something new and bigger together.
Right. And we just have old cliches that prevent us from creating value. Like if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. Really? Because
so much.
There's a lot of stuff that I'm not that good at.
Yeah.
If I can find other people that are weird enough to like the things that I don't, awesome. We can get further, right? It might not be as fast because there's training and there's delegation and there's pieces like that, but really getting good at marketing, really getting good at finding other venues and avenues to create processes and automation to deliver what you're up to, and then collaborating with the right people to get further. This is all a big part of value creation, but it begins with understanding who you are. It begins with knowing what value you can create, and a lot of times we're too close to it. So we discount it. We're like, yeah, whatever, that's not a big deal. No, it is a big deal because other people aren't good at it.
Right.
And if we're not willing to get clear about that, we're never going to provide major value.
And I know like Strategic Coach, they use the word unique ability pretty frequently. And I remember being so stuck on that. I'm like, anybody can do what I'm doing. It's easy to hire someone.
Anyone
to do
can
what
laugh
I
at
do.
Garrett's jokes.
Yeah.
No.
Anybody can create a spreadsheet and,
Yeah.
But then you realize.
Host an Ask the Money Nerds episode.
Yeah. I don't know about that one.
See, it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough. You got to acknowledge yourself there.
Yeah. But it's just going back to that, you realize once you know who you are, you're coming to the table with your unique stories and who you are. And that's your unique ability, right?
So self-discovery is a huge part of it.
Yep.
And exposing your skill sets, investing in your skill sets. So self-discovery, so you can reduce limitation and limiting beliefs and, obstacles and blocks that stand in your way. And then discovery of your skill set so that they could be exposed to the marketplace. And then when you figure out those skill sets, you have to try different avenues and venues, right? I was nervous to speak on stage the first time. I sucked. So I hired a coach. I got better. I practiced, but it was something that called to me. Not everybody wants that. So find out what your avenue of value is and don't try to be someone else because you're going to be a lesser version.
Yeah. And it requires you to be willing to experiment, to fail, quote unquote. I don't really see it as failure. It's just data that we gather and pivot, so we know how to pivot and move forward and change directions. But just becoming not familiar, but comfortable with things not going perfectly or as you imagine them just right out of the gate.
Mistakes are part of the process.
Absolutely.
Mistakes are part of the process. And wealthfactory.com/solution gives people an amazing guide. It was really the gift that I gave when people bought Killing Sacred Cows to put the pieces together to establish a daily structure to get clearer about the value you can create, to get more intimately understanding yourself and what value you can provide. It unveils parts of that. And so it really comes down to this concept that seems slightly airy-fairy, I'll admit, but it's sole purpose. It's your values, abilities, and passions combined for the highest context of living. Highest context of living is a vision that compels you forward, a vision that matters to you. And when you get clear about what your sole purpose is, then you're going to be more powerful because you're your best self.
Yeah.
Right? It's who you are at your core, not necessarily what you do. But as you get clear about that, you become more valuable because confidence is a huge part of value. If we're just not confident in our abilities, then people feel that. They sense that scarcity. As we invest in ourselves and then we apply it to other people, we continue to gain new confidence, new capabilities, and really new levels of value creation.
Yeah, definitely. So I think a piece of this question and some of the other questions have come in is, if I'm honing in on my investor DNA and figuring out what my sole purpose is, if I'm learning how to create value, then how does that actually impact my finances? Because some questions are like, how do I make more money? And this is a big piece of that. So let's connect the pieces for the listeners on like, when I figure out the assets that I bring to the table and I'm creating more value for the world, how does that translate into a healthier or more robust financial life?
Well, let's look at the formula right now that most people follow. They try to cut back, scrimp, save, and sacrifice. They like to fund something that isn't going to pay off for 30 years. And what that does is it neglects their own discovery of their abilities. And so they're putting their life in some other market or person's hands that they don't control the outcome. But it's easy because everybody does it. It's easy, but it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So that's why we're seeing so much failure in the financial system. You have to take responsibility for yourself and your actions, which is scary.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, what if I make a mistake? Well, you will make a mistake. It's part of the process. But if you can learn from those mistakes and course correct, then you can continue to grow and add more value. So making more money is a huge part of being wealthier. Like, You could be there's books like The Wealthy Barber, or there's stories about a janitor that becomes a millionaire. Yes, there's The Millionaire Next Door, and that book has a lot of those stories. But the reality is, do they enjoy life? Do they live wealthy along the way? Will this work for everyone? Is it against your nature or maybe your spouse's to do these things? Because if everything's about living a budgeted lifestyle, yes, you can have $1 million in a retirement plan, but in today's interest rates, that's 30 grand taxable per year. That's still living like a janitor at that point. So the question is, where can you really contribute? How can you make more money? You either impact more people, and there's technology that helps you do that, or you more deeply impact the people you serve. And that's a process that says consistently you survey the people you serve and say, what are you looking for? What would you want? How can I add more value? What could I do better? And we consistently look for collaboration in the things that we're not good at. That delegation opens up and frees up the things that we do best. And far too many people are trying to go it alone. They're trying to do it, as cheaply as possible, and it slows them down. So make more money, keep more money, then worry about growing your money. People are skipping the steps to go invest money in investments that don't make sense for who they are. And I get the lowest common denominator when people go, well, people should pay off their home because they're just going to blow that money. Well, they're probably going to lose their home if they're bad at managing money, and they're not saving anything because they're one financial issue away from foreclosure. And that's harsh, but the reality is we've got to start being responsible, looking at our actual spending and understanding, are we investing in increasing who we are and our capabilities and what we're doing? And if we're not, we're just in dangerous territory where we're relying on other people that may or may not have our best interests in mind, might not be in a system that's going to work. And so I really think it comes down to, what do you want? So if you think there's a secret to money, well, the first secret is invest in yourself. Figure out what you do best. We gave some pieces and formulas and insights of how to do that. Value creation is the key, and value creation is king because dollars follow value. So learn how to add more value, figure out what to invest in and what not to invest in by discovering your investor DNA. And really, it's just know that you're going to make some mistakes along the way, learn the lessons, and keep moving forward.